Hello, good evening, and welcome. This is Science Fiction Snob, and today I am here with my co-host, Stevie Z. Stevie?
Hello, how are you?
All right, and today we're going to be carrying on with our series about our long-form discussions on the Riverworld series, and we're looking at the third book, The Dark Design, today. Now, this is the thickest book of the series, so this one's going to be a little long. So I'm going to split it in half. We're going to go an hour. We're going to cut it part one, and then part two will be however long it is, and we'll post them up pretty quick. So just so that it's more convenient for people to watch. Before we get into it, though, something that our listeners might be interested in. This week, if you didn't know, Canada became the second country in the world to legalize marijuana. And Steve knows a lot about this. I don't know anything about this kind of stuff. Steve is an expert, though, of course. And
I
so
am
we're gonna get what do you think about this, Steve?
I am not an expert on this. I do have a lot of friends that use marijuana, and I have a lot of friends that use marijuana and play in foosball tournaments, and they certainly are not going to be admitting to the duty patrol when they cross the border into the U.S. to go to foosball tournaments, because all the cool tournaments are in the U.S. And if they want to be able to go, they can't even admit to having ever used it from any online source or anything else. I do believe not much will change. I think the government just wants more money and realizes so many people smoke, but don't even realize how many people smoke because they're already running out of the cheap stuff, and everyone flocked to the cheap stuff because their prices are so high. So not a lot's going to change. People that don't want the world to know they smoke are still going to be that way. Just because it's legal in Canada, people aren't going to be coming out of the closet and telling their kids and their parents and their coworkers and everybody else that have prejudices against it that they smoke. So I don't think much will change, except people will be in a lot more trouble. Now that it's legal, it's going to be more policed because people will be losing their driver's license all the time. And the black market will get in way more trouble. People going to the black market, trying to keep their anonymity, will be in way more trouble. So now that it's legal, it's going to be way more illegal, actually, unless you don't want to do any traveling and you want to be like totally under the microscope and expose yourself. So it's great. I think it's just great.
All right, so that's an interesting take. And if there's anybody from U.S. Customs listening here, you heard it here first. The foosball community is rife with potheads.
No, it isn't. No,
That's
it
what.
isn't. They've
That,
never touched the stuff. In fact, you got to practice your never.
really? Because that's all I heard from everything you said. All I got was there's a lot of potheads in the foosball
Yeah,
community.
well, they're not going to admit to who is who, and there's a lot of clean cut. There's a lot of clean cut guys, and because they're all nerds, they're going to be able to pass for non potheads. Don't worry, don't worry.
So I don't know. Maybe I should try to get some sort of. We get a bounty or something. Can I get money from the?
Well, if you not okay, I'm not promoting this video. You're going to get like 15. It's going to stay at 15 views.
15 views. We're gonna stay. We're
Yeah,
gonna stay
so
in low single digits
no
without
risk. That
Steve
still
promoting
puts us at risk for not being able to go play foosball tournaments. What's the harm, man? Don't you
I'm
want Canada to represent?
I'm sure there's nobody from U.S. Customs listening, so
They might
I
like
don't
the
think we have to
Riverworld.
worry.
They might like the Riverworld stories and want to
Maybe,
hear
maybe. All right. Well, we'll take that. I'll have to erase that in editing. Then we'll erase all this part of the conversation. So
I'm
let's
not
say
saying I am. I'm saying I have a lot of friends that
right.
do.
Okay. So my view, of course, being a science fiction snob, I only alter my consciousness with good science fiction. So I have nothing about any of these type of things. But I will tell you that driving around my medium-sized to smaller town here the day after pot was legalized, all I saw on the sides of the streets from end to end. It was like a zombie apocalypse. Nothing but stoned out people on the side of the road, uh, begging everybody for Doritos as they go by. So, I don't know. That's what I saw. Reefer madness everywhere. So, take that what you will. I actually, come to think of it, I'm not sure if that happened or not. That could have been an idea, a poor novel idea that I had. So one or the other, that either happened or it was just a bad idea that I had. But
Or
I don't know.
that's what those with the prejudices expected to happen.
One or the other, I'm not sure. People have to come up and see for yourself. But let's move on. Let's get to what we're here about. We're here to talk about The Dark Design, the thickest book of the series, and actually, as we mentioned before, I think we mentioned before in an earlier one, The Dark Design, Book 3, and the Magic Labyrinth, Book 4, were actually written all at once. And then Farmer's publisher said, "Hey, it's too big, chop it." So he cut it in two, and most of it, the majority of it, ended up in The Dark Design. So, Steve, you want to start us off here on The Dark Design? Where do we start? Beginning of the book, what happens?
Well, we didn't get much Burton in the previous book, as everyone knows, and it starts out with a dream Burton is having. He is it's a tool that helps summarize the story so far as well, that Farmer likes to use in case it's been a while since you've read the previous book, or perhaps you're starting the series, you happen to be picking up this book and starting it there. That does happen. So he does take advantage of segues to be able to do this.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Yeah, very typical what he does.
Yes, and so they review a bit, but one thing he does provide when he does that, because he realizes a lot of the readers already know this stuff, so he's always adding stuff to that too. So he's always throwing a bone at the reader who's putting up with it, based on having known all this stuff already. So he dreams about the ethical round table, and and the focus draws more on them questioning whether X, the renegade ethical, they all at the round table knows that one of them is a traitor, and and they really emphasize and make the reader question whether or not X is a good guy or a bad guy, and kind of leading towards sick and insane.
Yeah, that's something that stood out to me. Burton he's questioning X. He's saying, seems he's already suspicious of X a little bit. Is X sick? Is he insane? Well, why would he do this against, these guys seem to be actually doing a good thing. Why is he against it, right?
Yes, why would he oppose the luxuries and extra life offered to mankind? Yes, and yeah. I'm reading your points here. I'm actually I'm actually cheating and reading your notes. So yes, this was totally.
Notes?
Totally.
What do you mean notes? This is all off the top of our heads.
Well, generally it is off the top of our heads, but I gotta admit I'm cheating a bit here, because my notes are very vague on this, and what I picked up from it was Alice overheard a lot of this dream. He wakes up and Alice starts to suspect something's up, and he's not telling her stuff. And
I think Alice has been suspecting, like, since they've been together, sort of thing. But she's just sort of kept her mouth shut because he's been having these dreams the whole time, right? Like, that was my feeling of it, right?
yeah, and she hears him talking in his sleep a lot, so she's probably getting several pieces along the way.
All right, so the first little bit just quickly sets up, backstory. inserts this idea that X is maybe sick or insane, and then it puts Burton back in Thalim, which basically was at the end of, correct me if I'm wrong, at the end of To Your Scattered Bodies Go, right? 7 years after the whole, his 7 years on the Suicide Express, he ends up in Thalim, right? After his,
That's
his
right.
being taken over with the ethicals, and then the next, so that basically is just the first, what has happened before. Then it goes right on to Burton's been on one of his boats, and it sets it up. They've actually been 25 years or 20 or 25 or 26 years, 25 years sailing on the river, and he's still with Frigate and everybody. There's some information about Alice's relationship and Alice and Burton's relationship. Do you want to talk a little about that, or I can talk about
Sure,
it?
sure, sure. And and where they are now, actually, they're at some. They've got the Haji 2. They've got the Haji 2 docked. Alice and him, they're arguing based on she's finally talking to him about the fact that she's finally bringing up the fact that
Yeah, he's a secret, and he hasn't been.
right, but they leave that, they get back to that a little later too, and because they fight again. But I'll get to that in several chapters ahead. They fight again, and still Burton doesn't confide in her, but he basically does admit he is keeping a secret later on. But he doesn't go to that point yet. And I believe the reader that a lot of people, in their reviews of the Fabulous Riverboat, were disappointed that they didn't get as much Burton, because the first book was really popular. The first book was the most popular. So I think this part also establishes the fact that Burton's back and the crew are back, and we get more stories with them, and that's kind of an exciting thing. There's been a long gap between books at this point, I remember,
Yeah, yeah,
and there's not as huge a gap to the next book because, as you said, they were kind of written together. So I believe the release dates are much closer together for those two, and it's an exciting time for Riverworld fans, and Burton's back. So it's I remember being excited that we get to follow his story, but I still wanted more of the Clemens crew and all the new developments that were to come there. But so Burton's hanging out with his crew, with the Ganopo tribe, and the chief and Burton are taking the opportunity to just sit around and talk, and that gives Farmer the opportunity, pardon me, to let you know the state of affairs. Resurrections have stopped, and Burton and the chief are discussing that and speculate why the resurrections might have stopped. And because the chief is not as modern, Burton kind of dumbs down a little bit the way he talks to him, because the chief doesn't have the same concepts of distance, etc., and time. And Burton found this out along the way. So at this point, Burton has known the guy. They've been docked there for a while. They like it there, and he's talking to the chief, and it goes into Burton's own thoughts about it and how much it disturbs him that resurrections have stopped. He's not heard of anyone being resurrected, and that's a pretty big deal. And in fact, the scene shifts all over the Riverworld throughout this book, following 3 or 4 stories. And that's a topic of discussion among the whole Riverworld. And so Farmer gives you a feel of this crisis and how suddenly their mortality is back.
yeah. I find that interesting about how you mentioned the design of this book, and it is a lot more choppy than maybe choppy is not the right word, but it switches a lot between, as we're going to see soon, switches between visions of certain characters. It goes to this character, then back and forth and back and forth, and it does that a lot faster than the other books. The other books had some switching, but not as much as this one, and not as often. I don't know if you'd agree with that or not.
Absolutely, and that's perfect. It's still perfect in a way because he established two groups of characters in the first two books, so it was appropriate that he stuck with them, and we got an entire book's worth of adventure and learning about them and getting to know them in each, and a whole group of characters in each. And now one of the groups is divided because there's several groups divided because there's two boats: the stolen boat, the pursuit boat that has already launched. It doesn't get into it yet, but it's already launched at this point. So there's the two boats, the blimp crew that will happen, and all sorts of stories break off from that. And I believe his formula is great, a great way to follow it.
Yeah, I bring that up because it's a little different than I don't have any problem with it or anything, but just a little different from than what he did before. Not a big difference. So I think you did a good. It's a good description of what was going on there. So one last thing on this part is that he's explaining as you said he met this tribe of people, and they actually live on the river. I guess is a little wider at this point, and there's some island in the middle of the river, and so he's stopped in this island. They actually have a grail. He stopped on this island, and they're hanging out with these guys. So these guys kind of in the middle of the river. River's wider, and they are. It's nighttime, and I guess Burton gets up. He's always had insomnia. He gets up and he looks around. He sees a giant, like over the fog. He sees this giant, a large tower or something. Something in the fog, sticking its head out of the fog. It's an idol or something. And he eventually, he quickly realizes that it must be a big raft coming down the river, and there's something, there's a guard tower on the raft, there's some sort of idol on the raft, you can see part of it, there's a guard tower on the raft, the guy looks like he's sleeping, so they're heading, it's unusual that there's islands in the river, so they obviously don't know there's an island, and the guy is sleeping, so he's like, this raft, who knows how big it is, it could be very large, is going to smash into us, and he attempts to wake up his crew, get the boat launched, but he's too late, and this giant raft smashes into the island and into the dock where the boat is. His boat is docked, and everyone goes flying over the side or whatever. We're not sure what happens. Kind of just cuts there, right? If I'm correct.
Yeah, the scene shifts all of a sudden. There's a big crash imminent, and the scene shifts, and he does that a lot. Like as you mentioned, you're just warning the listeners that there's going to be a lot of scene shifts, and they're at inopportune times at a time.
It's like an '80s Dukes of Hazzard TV show, if you remember that. I don't know if I remember that when I was a kid, and it'd be all like the Dukes of Hazzard. The car will be flying halfway up in the air over some jump, and then
they'll stop halfway in the
commercial, right?
How's this going to turn out? But there's an area. How do you think this is going to turn out?
Yeah. It's very typical, even if you want to
came
go
out
back
here like a house on fire.
Yeah, if you didn't see the Dukes of Hazzard, you can go back to anything like the Batman, the original 1960s Batman version, where will the dynamic duo get out of wherever? Same type of thing. So it just quits. Before we go on to the next part, I wanted to mention something that I thought was kind of funny. So
it's what was cut off, that conversation, right? Go ahead. But the raft cut off the conversation Burton and Frigga were having. Is that what you were going to get into?
No, I was going to get into this into the description of science fiction that they're in the middle of. They have a discussion. They're talking about science fiction.
Right. Burton's trolling.
Burton's
trolling.
Like, what the heck is science fiction? And Frigga says to him, I'm going to read it right off there. I got the page here. So and we know that Frigga is farmer. So just, you can basically take this as farmer's words. That's what I did here. Don't ask me to define science fiction. No one was ever able to give it a completely satisfactory definition. However, What it is was a genre of literature which most of the stories took place in a fictional future. It was called science fiction because science was supposed to play a large part in it. The development of science in the future, that is. This science wasn't confined to physics and chemistry, but also included extrapolations of the sociological and psychological science of the author's time. So that's pretty good. Is a little bit more. In fact, any story that took place in the future was science fiction. However, a story written in 1960s, for instance, which projected a future of 1984, was still classified as science fiction in 1984. So it's kind of an interesting. He basically, he thinks that he works in a. There's a little more where Burton says, "Well, you work in you work."
Profession that doesn't exist.
Yeah, you work in a. There's no such thing. You work in a profession that doesn't exist. He's like, yeah, kinda. So I thought that was kind of funny. If you're reading that.
Yeah, Burton was written to have sharp wit and trolled people very well.
Before trolling was even trolling.
Yes.
All right, so we have a big scene shift, and then I'm always have trouble with Jill Gulbirra. I never can pronounce names in books. Whenever I read them, I just make up whatever I want. I don't care, but
The audiobook guy says Gulbirra.
yeah, there you go. And they're probably right. Gulbirra. So Jill Gulbirra. So scene shifts right away to this a new character we've never seen before, Jill Gulbirra. Gulbirra, and it talks about her arrival. She's been sailing in a canoeing downriver for, I don't know, was it 10,000 miles or something like that, a large amount, and
No, almost the circumference of the world.
really
It's
20, 25, 20,000.
Yeah, it's revealed in Bag's article that really humiliates her. We'll get into that later, but oh yeah, I got it right here. It's 20,000. You're right, 20,000 miles.
Yeah, so a lot.
Yeah.
She's it's at night, so she comes down and she's looking for Paralendo, right? So the story starts off that the rumor is that these guys are building an airship, and Jill is an airship pilot. Of course, we didn't have airships. Jill dies in 1983, and Farmer's writing, in the late 70s. So he's assuming that airships became, really popular on Earth, which they didn't really. But anyway, she's coming down she's in her canoe. She comes up, pulls in, and she comes upon four guys: Firebrass, Schwartz, Zeke, and Cyrano. Two of which are important. And they're basically drinking around a Grailstone, toasting Clements on it's the anniversary of the launch of the second riverboat, right? So we skip that whole part, right?
Yes.
Sam's boat has been stolen, and then all of a sudden now he's already been on the river. He's built another one. He's been on the river for I think it's I always got this wrong. They say anniversary, but I think it's like the 3-year anniversary since they departed. Do you know?
Something like that.
Something
It's
like
bigger and better too.
Yeah,
It's bigger and better.
So Resurrections has stopped. They're talking about that, and she just sort of shows up out of the fog. Do you want to take it from there? It's kind of an interesting scene.
She in fact says the next sentence. Firebrass says something to the effect of, "We need a really good dirigible pilot," and she says, "I'm your man." Right. That's the first thing she says to them. And
that's important.
And she's interrupting a conversation, and then when she pulls down her hood, Firebrass sees that she's a woman, and he exclaims over it. And Cyrano's there. Okay, let's see who's there. Firebrass, Cyrano, Schwartz, and Hardy. Hardy's a 18th century whaler, I believe, or 1800s whaler. And Schwartz, I forget what Schwartz did for a living, but Hardy's more of a main character. He's one of Firebrass's right-hand men, and he only has the experience of being a whaler from the 1800s, but he just learns stuff quick. And some people that you don't think would get these high-end positions, get them by showing an aptitude for them, I suppose. But anyway, Cyrano is kind of being sexist, and he he gets too familiar with her. He approaches her saying, "You're not a woman," and grabs her in the chest area, and she knees him in the crotch. He's doubled over in a lot of pain, and Firebrass is laughing about it, and she's offended and taken aback, and she knows who it is that she kicked. She's heard about them. Legend of these people have traveled down the river, and she feels guilty about it, but at the same time, she doesn't regret what she did because he was being quite sexist and too familiar with her. I was going to say it in a different way. I have it written down in what I thought was a comical way to say it at the time, but I realized it's not comical, and I approached it from a different standpoint now that we're recording, because it is a disrespectful act, and he received swift punishment for it.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's kind of, I mean, if you think about it, right? These four guys are very big up in Paralando, right? And here is a country that controls, what do they say, 64 miles on either side of the river. They've got, technological supremacy over anyone you could think of in the whole world. And these guys are, the head guys of the state, drinking and getting together, having a little toast to their buddies who have left. And out of the fog comes this woman out of nowhere, just saying, "Hey, I'll be your man. I know you're looking for something." They're like, "What the heck?" They're taken aback, surprised. It's the middle of the night. How did she get there through all their defenses? No one, it's kind of, people don't just show up, right? Like a ghost, right?
How did she travel almost the circumference of the globe safely in a canoe?
By herself, yeah. Yeah, so they're a little bit taken aback, and but the way she dispatches Cyrano is pretty simply. She obviously can take care of herself. Now, I think this is an interesting thing about the book, is that, like the second book was a lot about racism, right? The discussion between Firebrass and Clemens and Soul City. This one's going to be about sexism, and that we're going to see that through Jill, her character, right? So she seems to have this. She's kind of got this sort of semi-man hating,
Chip on her shoulder.
70s feminist chip on her shoulder type thing, right? Even though she's bisexual, but she's, kind of, I think this is Farmer trying to explore that a little bit. Like
Yeah.
even in her interior monologue, right? She's trying to be. She's like, she's constantly thinking about herself. I'm as good as a man. I can do that. But yet she wants to prove herself all the time. She
And she's
feels.
also checking herself ethically too. So
Yeah, yeah.
it's an interesting. He's trying to go everywhere with her
Yeah,
thoughts.
yeah, her thoughts are everywhere. She's talking about, she's trying to prove herself as good as a man. She automatically seems to think that everybody is sexist. She wants to be, equal and egalitarian towards this, but yet every time she has an interaction with a man, she assumes that they think that she's weaker than them because she's a woman, right? So she's actually sexist herself, or at least, treats the men as very stereotypical. Some of them are sexist, but from the reading, from the reading of her interactions with the main characters, right? There's nothing really for her to suspect them of being sexist. Would you agree with that? Like, there's some other characters, the minor character later on, like the head of the church, the local head of the Church of the Second Chance. She meets him at a party. He's obviously sexist, but the other characters, like Firebrass and even Cyrano, they're not really, I would consider them to be sexist. Would you agree with that, or maybe I don't know? Am I wrong?
I would agree with that. I think a lot of the main characters is like those you mentioned. The guys, those top guys like Firebrass and Cyrano. I think they're well grounded in they're dynamic people, they're dynamic characters, but they're still well grounded, and they have a sense of humility where they don't come off as being better than anyone, and that would include women.
Yeah.
They like Firebrass is the head honcho, and he'll admit that, and he treats his position as such. And and but I agree with you. Yes, I don't think they have too much of a. I don't think they're written too sexist, and I'm not sure. Sometimes I wonder if Farmer's villainizing the feminism, and sometimes I feel as though he's supporting the feminism. It's interesting depending on how he's writing it.
Yeah, yeah. No, I wanted to mention that too. That's a big thing. Like, she seems to be almost neurotic about this. I can't be seen as weaker to men. They're always thinking that I'm weaker. Like, it's almost neurotic, and you think that maybe he's, insulting feminism, and suggesting that feminists are all, thinking this way all the time. But then at other times, you know, maybe he's trying to be supportive of feminism and saying,
Right,
you
and
know,
it was in the period that he wrote this in, that was one of the main topics of discussion, just like the civil rights movement, the
yeah.
women's lib movement, right?
Yeah, I don't know when the Equal Rights Amendment in the U.S. was. I don't offhand. I know it was the '70s. I don't know offhand exactly when it was, but this will be. This would have affected his writing. So maybe that's what it's. Maybe that's what he's trying to say. But throughout the, I guess we'll try not to, you know, uh, stick on that too much for the rest of this. But
Well, it
we
actually
just
it
go
plays
ahead.
into the next part where she's shown around by Hardy,
Yeah,
and even then she's being shown around, and she brings up the fact that she should be captain. She's got more experience than everyone, and the fact that she has more experience has no bearing on it. The guy interviewing her tried to tell her that it doesn't matter whether a man comes along with more experience than her. He's not getting the job either, because Firebrass is the boss. It doesn't matter whether she's a man or a woman with more qualifications. It's not qualifications that gets you the chief of the project position.
yeah,
And when when someone brings that up, that even if a man with more experience comes along, she deflects and says something like, "No such creature exists, a man with more experience," rather than accepting the logic of what they're trying to tell her, that it's not about being a man or a woman to get the head honcho position. It's about Firebrass having earned it from the previous book.
yeah, yeah. So Farmer's going to use this character to, bring up bring up sexism, throughout the book. Um, yeah. So you started to touch on moving on. The next little bit, we get more information on the character of Jill, that she's, bisexual, that she had a male lover who left her, and then she had a female lover who was raped and killed, and then there's a somewhat humorous um, incident with the Paralando is a very liberal state, so they have freedom of speech, right? So the newspaper really attempts to push the freedom of speech to the to quite the a very as far as it can, and basically writes news. I mean, I guess if you consider they don't have much for entertainment, they don't have Netflix and streaming or anything of this kind of
They
stuff.
make
So
movies though. They
they
do
do
make
say they make movies. Yeah, that's true. But
music. Yeah.
yeah, but so I guess the newspaper is probably considered. It's more like what the newspapers would be in the early 1900s, and you listen, you
With excellent writing.
yeah, you'd read the newspaper every day, and there'd be all kinds of stuff in their stories and stuff. So these guys, it's more of a gossip rag, right? So we won't go into too much detail, but because
Oh, it's awesome. He talks about how her poo stinks and everything.
the reader has to read it to get the real sense of it. But anyway, these guys, it's a the writer, the reporter who's writing the story. It's a recount of his interview with Jill, and basically how he feels threatened, and he implies that she's more of a man than he is, or that at least she thinks she is, and basically gets all of her character traits out in this one little article that he writes out, and of course it makes her very mad because it portrays her in a very negative light. But apparently this is what the this newspaper does all the time, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, and he does eventually get replaced because people just keep attacking him for how vicious he likes to write his stuff.
Yeah,
The skill with which Farmer wrote it is excellent. The farther back you go, when I was in high school, the average vocabulary was 15,000 words for a high school student, and you go back, and that's what in the mid 80s. So you go back 20 years only, and the average vocabulary was 25,000 words. And I was in high school 30 years ago. So what's it at now? But anyways, you're going back to FC Baggs time, and the literacy rate would have been way higher. And Farmer does an excellent job depicting that. Farmer's writing skill is above reproach, absolutely. And I wanted to get into, even upon introduction, she was giving him a hard time, teaching her what Ms. means, and this guy depicted her as the writing, the sarcasm he had, making fun of the title Ms. and stuff.
yeah, it's biting.
Yeah, it's biting, and goes on to describe Gulbirra actually means carnivorous kangaroo, which might not have existed, but she likes it, so she took on the name herself. And
Yeah,
and it's written from a sexist standpoint, but it's not Farmer's standpoint; it's FC Bag's standpoint,
yeah,
right? So it's biting, but still humorous and very skillfully written.
yeah. It's one of the good. Yeah, it's a good little piece in the
And
book.
she reads it. She reads it. And Piscator, she meets Piscator, and he consoles her right away because he knows she just read this thing because
Yeah,
he got up earlier than her and read it already. So this is the introduction to Piscator.
yeah. And this
Her,
is
her,
this is an important character here.
oh yeah.
I think. So go ahead.
Um, okay. Well, upon meeting, they go to put their grails, and Farmer gets into. They go to. She meets up with him, and they go to put their grails in the grail stone. And we talk about this, that everybody has a grail. It's like I always picture it as a thermos that gets filled up with food, smokes, weed, and some dream gum, which is like an LSD kind of thing, but more advanced. And and 3 times a day, you get 3 square meals a day. You never know what you're going to get. Fascinating thing about people's tastes that Farmer gets into, like if even though religions have been proven wrong, I'd still be religious. I gotta admit, but I
That's an interesting. Yeah, at the end we have to talk about some of these themes. Like at the end of the whole series, I think
Farmer gets into how
that's an
people
interesting
that have been,
question. I don't want
yeah,
to. I don't want to go into detail about it now, but I think that's really interesting to discuss.
people that didn't like pork
Religion.
because of their religion still get nauseated by pork, even if they abandon the religion on Riverworld. You know what I mean? But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I won't get into too much either. So, anyways, Farmer gets into the size of the grills. Can we talk about this just for a sec? Farmer,
We talked about it before, and I know you are very keen to
I won't get
discuss
in.
it.
I
So
won't get
no,
too.
go for it, man. Go for it.
All right, all right. Farmer, I love his work. Obviously, I'm a huge fan. It's my favorite. This is my favorite series. I'll go on record saying that. And he is my favorite writer. I'll have to admit. I've got signed stuff by him and a whole shelf dedicated to this guy. But he had really poor math skills and had no clue when it came to units of measurement.
Blasphemy.
That's a little harsh, but like mountain heights and tower, like calling something a tower that's more like shaped like a pizza. We'll get into that later, but his inconsistencies with different units of measure, like the river gets called 10 million miles long and 20 million miles long. Anyways, he's saying the grails are basically 3/4 of a meter in length and over and about half a meter in diameter, which is closer to a garbage can than even a bucket. It's bigger than a bucket, and that's a little too much. You don't need that much food 3 times a day or that much weed, and maybe Jill Gulbirra does, according to FC Bags. But but uh, he wrote these grails to be huge, and I know we all picture them to be like a slender thermos streamline, something a little more streamlined, and I think we should just go on picturing it to be a little more streamlined than these giant garbage cans that we're all born with, that everybody's born with along the side of the river. I like to say we because I do occasionally fantasize about living there, but with 20th century plumbing, so my fantasies are totally
Yeah, yeah.
inconsistent. Anyway, sorry, back to you.
No, that's a good point. It's a point of discussion about the grail sizes. Um, uh, I usually I don't hold the my writers to that closely
Right.
to reality. I just like, oh, it looks kind of like a thermos. I'm good with that. I'm not gonna go and but
Yeah, yeah.
I actually, to be honest, I had never really thought about this. But then when you're talking about it, yeah, it's 55 centimeters wide. I'm like, wait a second, 55. That's pretty big. Like that's not a thermos. A thermos is 10 centimeters diameter, not yeah. So yeah, maybe he just and the whole thing. Talking about the length of the river, that did kind of throw me when I first read the book. Oh, 10 million mile long river, that's really long. And then you get into the second book, it's like now it's 20 million miles long. What the heck? Like, how come it? He was writing and said, oh, it needs to be longer, and he
Right,
just
right.
sort of, I'll
Because
just make it.
fans would be writing him letters saying, actually, you'd have like over 1,200 people per square mile if you did it like that. So he's got probably a lot of people being like me saying, why are we carrying around garbage cans?
Yeah, the
I'm
old
not going to get too technical on him. Just
the
he should leave
William.
that stuff out and let us stick to the imagination if
Yeah,
he's going to go if he's going to be way off.
it's the
And there should
William
be an
William
editor.
Shatner on Saturday Night Live scenario again, eh? It's just a show. So yeah, but anyway, yeah. So we were talking about Piscator, um, important character, and it again shows some of Jill's sexism and racism. Like she's trying to fix herself, but she still's like, you're a Japanese from this time period. You thought women were less than whatever, and Piscator's like, well, I've changed since then, and we find out later, like, I always get a good sense from him, at the beginning of the book, but we find out later that he is probably, he's up there for ethical advancement, right? If you assume that what the river world is, the purpose of the river world is what the ethical say it is to, advance yourself, or sorry, what the Church of Second Chance says, to advance yourself ethically and, become a better person. I mean, this guy is probably the best person we've seen so far. I mean, I don't know if you'd agree with that. Yeah, he's more
Yes, I
ethically
would.
advanced.
Yes, I would.
Yeah.
And I won't get into the other character we meet along the way, but their common denominator are both being Sufis
Yeah.
of the right Sufi masters,
Yeah.
and really really nice guys that that are fascinating people and very insightful. They seem to have fewer clues required to come to the same conclusions that other people get when everything's falling in their lap and being laid out for them.
Yeah.
So they're very insightful. They suspect the right people to suspect and suspect the right circumstances and are on to things and really help the reader keeping up with the reader. It's like a character that keeps up with the reader. The reader knows some of these things, and this character is insightful enough to pick up on it on his own. So it's familiarizing him to the reader in that capacity too, I believe.
Yeah. So yeah, I would agree. So Jill gets invited to a party. She's kind of like, oh, I should go to this party. I should get to know these people. Like, I spent a lot of time alone. I don't want them to think that I'm, crazy from being alone. I want to make. She's really keen on getting this, becoming part of the airship, no matter what. So at the party, we're introduced to the local. I don't know. I think is he a bishop? Local bishop of the Church of Second Chance, and he's an old rabbi, and this is the character I was mentioned before, sexist. He's portrayed very sexist, treating his wife like almost a slave. We meet Greystock. There's an incident. They get informed that Sam Clements is on the radio, and they go to hear about Sam. She's
Firebrass.
invited. Yeah, Firebrass invites her,
Yeah.
and she has a dream gum incident. Jill after that. After talking to Sam, she has a dream come incident. So that's kind of what happens in this little part. I don't know. You want to? What do you want to talk about? Go ahead. What? Any of
Okay,
those particular
at the
aspects?
party, Cyrano apologizes at the party.
Yep.
When Greystock is at the party, I'm like, wow, man, Greystock was on the other side of the world traveling with Burton, and now he's in this world too. It's kind of cool that there's a connection between the
Yep.
two worlds through that. And again, more discussion about resurrection ceasing because that's a big deal, right? Mortality's back, and it really unnerves people suddenly. Like even though we have to deal with that here on Earth, and we can't imagine the luxury of having to not deal with it. Now they're dealing with it again, so the reader doesn't can't even totally relate to this nervousness that Farmer writes about from Jill's perspective in this case, because he follows things around through Jill whenever she's present in a scene, it's through her perspective only.
Yeah.
Everything's through her perspective. So it goes into the resurrection ceasing again. And yes, she accompanies Firebrass. Hardy's there, and Firebrass and Clements mention X, and she goes to Hardy, "Who's X?" And Hardy's like, "I don't know. It's some inside joke between them." And
Yep.
she
Yep.
calls. She goes, and when Firebrass goes, "We found a new pilot," and introduces her, and it tells Sam it's Jill Gulbirra, and Sam goes, "A woman." And Jill again pipes up, "That son of a bitch," blah blah blah, and Sam hears her and still puts up with it, laughs, chuckles, rather than, "Why is this chick calling me a son of a bitch? What did I do?" Right? All I asked, "Oh, she's a woman. Sorry, my bad." Right?
Yeah.
But so she's really there we go again. She really pipes up about that, and yeah, she has this. She goes back to her thing, thinking about all this stuff.
Chip on her shoulder.
And yeah, she goes
Right.
back to her hut with a chip on her shoulder, takes some dream gum probably to cool off, and then gets the guy that left her. The guy that left her is in her vision. You get such realistic.
Steve, I lost you for about 10
All
seconds
right.
there. You might want to go
Okay.
back a little bit. You were talking about Jill has a dream gum incident. She sees the guy that left her.
And he rapes her. He rapes her, and it's realistic. The visions on Dream Gum are far more prominent than say an LSD hallucination, which you would only just see. You actually feel and can touch these things,
And
these
and that
visions, and
and that is because of why. How
uh,
do we? Well, I'll take it.
go ahead.
So she comes running out of the. She has this. Her her boyfriend or whatever lover is on fire when he's raping her. So she comes running out of the out of her hut, screaming, thinking she's on fire. Piscator comes out and says, "What's wrong?" And we're told that there's like red marks on the
Spon-
places where she's been touched
Instead
by.
of spontaneous combustion,
Yeah.
it's spontaneous scalding.
Yeah, and so she's not burned, but she's actually red in the areas that her the dream that attacked her has touched her, and he sees it and she slowly fades. And this is a concern of hers because she doesn't she's afraid again that she might get you know taken off. She won't be considered for the airship if she's quote crazy or something wrong with it, right?
Piscator as well. Piscator sees that as a threat as well. He's like, "Whoa, are you okay?" And he doesn't want someone dangerous flying the ship either. So he puts her on his own probation. Sorry, I don't mean to
No,
cut off,
no,
but
go ahead.
he gives her another chance. He questions her about it. He talks to her consolingly and nicely, as diplomatically as you can imagine from a Sufi, and basically puts her on probation, saying, "Okay, well, I'll give you another chance. I won't say nothing this time, but you can't let me catch you having a freak out like this again, or else I'll have to say something. It's the safety of the crew
Yeah.
depends on it." And so he puts her on probation, basically. And I'm not sure, but I think the scene shifts at that point.
Yeah, I just want to go back though. Just so on the radio with Sam, you mentioned it. She she gets angry the fact that Sam says what she's a woman, and it's kind of weird because Like, why that should not be? I mean, it's it shouldn't be unusual. I mean, how many, even at the time, when Jill dies in 1983, there's not going to be a lot of women who are doing things like, pilots and stuff like that, right? Like, so she should even, she should be sort of thinking, well, here's a guy, is he really surprised of all the pilots that would have been in the world at this time? What percentage would have been a woman? Very low. So should he, Sam Clements, be really surprised that she's a woman? He doesn't say anything other than, "Oh, a woman," and she's like, "Oh, I'll get him." And then Firebrass, like you said, sorts her out and says, "What do you care what he thinks? He's not here. I'm going to make the decisions. Who gives a crap what he's not telling me what to do." So she's got that little. They bring up that little chip on her shoulder again, sort of thing, to get her, to put her, show her character there.
And that might have got her amped up enough to do the foolish thing and take the dream jump.
Yeah,
right.
I think
Might
that
have
was.
amped herself up over nothing, basically.
Yeah, she got herself worked up, and then I think she says that to Piscator that she doesn't take Dream Gum normally, and that she's not going to take it again, right? I think she promises that, right?
Yes, yes. He puts her on some kind of probation, and she's left pondering what a kind guy he is, and goes through all sorts of weird thoughts, and then the scene shifts back to Metushaya's tribe and his giant raft crashing into the Haji 2.
Right. Back to where we were before we met Gulbirra.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. You want to go? Go ahead.
Carnivorous kangaroo. No, go. You can. It's up to you.
All right. I'll take this. I'll take the first part of this. So we're back to Burton. The raft has been damaged, and Burton's group is seriously in dire straits. Their whole boat, which took them a year to build, and all kinds of whatever thousands of cigarettes and booze and everything to get the wood, has been destroyed. Some of their party are hurt. One of their party is missing, so presumed dead and drowned. And the rest of them, some of them, a broken leg, can't walk, not, nothing too serious, but, serious enough. And more serious, they've all lost their grails, so they are screwed. Unless they want to survive on fish and acorns, I think they say is the only
acorn bread.
Acorn bread. Yeah, they take acorns and make it into some sort of bread, and it's pretty crappy. But yeah, especially if you're used to and they would no booze, no nothing, right? So there is a Burton goes over he's a bit of a schemer. So he needs to figure out what he's going to do. So he comes up with a plan to try to, to help their party out and, get things, basically the guys in this raft, it's their fault that, his stuff is destroyed. So, he thinks he deserves some compensation, and most people would probably agree. But of course, the raft guys don't think that they, deserve to give anybody any type of compensation. You want to take?
It's the will of Rushub, their god.
Yes.
If it happens, well, their god willed it to happen.
Of course, and that's a great excuse that you don't have to do anything, right?
Yeah, it's the will of Rushub.
That's right.
And Burton's like, well, I tried to reason with them, and so he justifies this. Burton managed to skulk around because after the crash, they were all over the place trying to move the boat and everything. So Burton skulked around and saw 30 free grails inside
Storage hut.
Some storage place,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
He tried to open them and they worked. And whoa, okay, a free grail, in my estimation, today, if you take it to I believe it would be worth about $2 million. And he found 30 of them, so that's quite a score. Right.
Yeah.
And his main crew is only those 5 or 6 people.
Yeah, I think it's 7, right? Something
7.
like
that. Okay. So basically they'll be overloaded and have bargaining chips if you can get these. And basically he decides, he tried to reason with this guy saying he's owed some compensation.
Yeah. So what's his plan? He basically goes and he you know the local people are a little bit pissed off with this guy with his giant raft coming down and smashing everything and not compensating them, right?
Because Burton and them made friends with everybody, and they're well
Yeah,
liked.
they like Burton. So he basically starts some rumors, which are mostly true, that they've got this wealth and that sort of thing, and riles up the locals, saying that hey, these guys. He calls the chiefs the friendly chiefs wise, and these guys are doing this stuff and they haven't paid any compensation. They're very rude. They seem to be ignoring us. They're not considering us. And also, I heard they had a lot of stuff on there. A lot of, riches and flint and various things that could be easily stolen.
Right, right. But he didn't mention any free grails.
No, because he wants
Right.
those for himself.
He did not mention any free grails. And what happened was the Shawanaki tribe across the river and the local Ganopo tribe, who they were staying with and friends with, were supposed to gang up and defeat the raft people. But there was a heavy fog.
Yeah. So
And
just before,
okay, sorry.
before you go on to that part. So basically, Burton figures out that, look, these guys are probably going to attack these guys, right, and try to steal some of their stuff. So I'll just wait until, about the time that attack happens, and I'll go in there, steal our own stuff, and we'll take off, in the confusion, basically, right?
Oh
So
yeah,
go ahead. I just want
yeah.
to summarize that a little before.
Oh no, no problem. Yeah, I was starting with a different point, but no problem, no problem. I They missed though. They missed. Burton did manage to pull off his heist and steal the Grails, but there was a fog, and the Shawanaki tribe missed the location of the island and did not perform the attack. And Burton and them had to flee. And I believe the raft people were going in a totally different. I believe they were going downriver because they're
Yeah,
raft and they're drifting, right? And Burton's going upriver, so
yeah,
he's going in the opposite direction. He's got the 30 grails. They're still stuck. They actually lost a meter progress in 3 days trying to move the thing. So the raft is still stuck. They basically, the plan didn't go through because the Shawanaki missed. And so they had to travel a lot. They just traveled and traveled and traveled. Probably had the grails tied up on a rope under the water as they did.
yeah.
And I believe they stole a boat to do
Yeah,
so.
so they steal, like, the raft has, as canoe type stuff on the as
Right.
well. They steal a
Yes.
boat and they go across they go to the other side of the river, and start heading upriver. And yeah, the boat is the raft is supposed to go down to the river and into the you know meet their god at the end of the river. So yeah, so Burton, they paddle up river a little bit and they're gonna build a new boat. They have the whole thing has drum system, right? They have a drum communication system throughout the
Yes.
Riverworld, basically. And so as soon as the raft people figure out, they see the fire that was set in order to bring the tribe to the right spot, to find the island in the fog. They see there was a fire there, and they're like, oh, well, something's happening. So that encourages them to hurry up and try to get off the island faster. And we didn't mention it, but they've been, when Burton steals their stuff, it's been like a week or 5 days or something like that. They've been trying to get the raft off before Burton enacts his plan, right? And
Yeah.
then then he heads up river, and of course the drum stuff goes out saying that Burton stole their stuff and blah blah blah. I'll give a bounty to anybody who catches him. And then Burton puts out a counter note saying, no, we didn't steal anything, and by the way, this guy's got like 100 free grails on his thing and all this stuff, right? So just basically.
That's actually the next tribe. That's the next tribe. I don't mean to
Oh,
contradict.
really?
Confusing. Yeah. They go 200 kilometers upriver, and they end up with the Osakas and the Algonquins, and it's 3200 AD. It's 32. It's 32 AR. It's 32 years after resurrection, and there's hardly any flint and supplies left everywhere, and so they're incredibly expensive. And they were told that if they want to build another boat, it's going to cost all their booze and tobacco for a year. And Kaz was flipping out, saying, "I'm gonna, you know me, man. I'm gonna have Nick fits," because he became a smoker, even though he's a caveman and never had cigarettes. He became a smoker. Anyways, this is why I just want to say, we can get into more detail, but I'm going to quickly run down the head of the. Oh yeah, they use one free grail out of their 30. They use one free grail instead of having to trade all their tobacco and
Yeah.
booze. These free grails are so valuable. They only use one free grail to get the right to stay and build a boat and use all the equipment they want
Yeah.
to build the boat. But and they decide against. Okay, it takes a year, and Chief Oscas asked Burton if he's heard of the Great White Boat, and that would be the first boat coming up the river through the drum system, right?
Right.
And they devise a plan to steal it, but Burton doesn't think he can steal it. He just wants to get on it. He realized, and suddenly his boat's done, and this big grand boat's coming down the river. He doesn't even care about this boat. He's never even sailed in. The boat's about not even launched yet, and he suddenly lost interest in this boat they built. But there's a lot more to it. They go on a scouting mission because Oscas wants to steal this boat. So they go on this scouting mission, and that's where Burton ditched them. And it's that guy that he claims to keep that guy off his ass. He says that guy's got 100 free grails. That's the guy he says has 100 free grails.
No,
I'm just saying.
I mixed them up.
Next guy, it's the next tribe up the river.
Yeah,
he did that too. No big deal. No big deal.
No, that's good.
Up the river. But yeah, they decide to. Instead of naming it the Haji, it takes them a year to build the boat, and they decide against the Haji 3. They name it the Snark, which leads to more snarkiness between him and Dick and Alice, pardon me. And later on at night, they argue, and Alice reveals that she hears lots about Dick talking about X. He's actually saying things about X and the mysterious stranger, and she's asking now. Now she's like point blank asking this guy who this is. And they haven't even launched their boat. They finished building it. Dick's fighting with her after they name it the Snark about X, and that he's keeping a secret. He's not telling her yet. Mm-hmm. And he's got on his mind, man, I got to get on this boat. What the heck? I got to get on this boat. Who's not heard about this boat, right? Everybody's like, the drum system is way faster than these boats can cruise up the river.
Right.
And the story about these boats, even with the resurrection ceased, the story about these boats has far preceded them in their journey. Sorry, I was just
no, it's good points.
I was just moving one tribe up the river. That tribe got away from that tribe. Actually, Farmer kind of left us hanging about that a little bit, but they basically got away. 200 kilometers. Farmer says they got 200 kilometers away, and never heard nothing since or something. I can't remember how that played out, but they only went 200 kilometers upriver and stayed a year there. So
yeah, but that would be enough to get away from the raft tribe, because 200 kilometers is pretty far. The raft is trying to go the other way. Either the raft, the people in that area got pissed off at the raft. People had either killed them all, or they got their raft off, more likely, and kept going downriver, because that raft cannot go upriver, right? So, but we never hear about the raft people again. All right, Stevie, there?
Yeah.
Well, we had a little comms problem there. We lost Steve for a sec.
Were you still recording?
Yeah, we're still recording. Anyway,
Okay.
I'll quickly review what I was saying, and then we'll get back to it. So the raft, I was saying we don't hear about what happens to the raft people. They're either killed by the locals, or they get their raft off and carry on down, but they don't bother Burton anymore. Yeah, so everything you've said does good job of summarizing what happens. Basically, Burton has decided that he's going to get on King John's boat, which is the first boat coming up, and there's a big discussion between Alice and Burton about his quote, his wanderlust, his constant traveling, which he's been traveling basically the whole time he's been on, for the last 32 plus years on the river, and she's been with him for all but the first 7 of those. And she mentions, there's one thing she mentions is, even when we're building the boat, you had to go on little trips, here or there after a while to see something. So it shows a little bit into his character. Anything you want to add about that? I just want to go on to the next part, which is all about Burton's suspicions about what's going on.
No, that's perfect. Yeah, because Farmer builds that up in sections, and progresses that subplot there between Allison and Burton. And yeah, you've got us up to speed. They Burton wants to get on the boat with his crew, and he and they try to travel upriver to get away from Oscar and them. And Oscar is busy trying to deal with his own people now who think he has 100 free grails, and why isn't he sharing the wealth with them and dealing with other people? So they're not being pursued. They're just trying to find a good spot where they presume, according to all the previous stops, where the wrecks will stop. And
Yeah.
that's where Peter runs into a guy who recognizes him called Bill O'Wayne. If you want to take over, Bill O'Wayne goes, "Hey, Pete, how's it going?"
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm gonna just talk. Let me do.
Okay.
I'll do the general sort of overview, and then let you go into the details there. So at this point in the story, and it starts out just after Frigate meets this guy. This is when Burton becomes, a little suspicious about the stories that he's been telling. So stuff like there's 36 billion people on the Riverworld. There was about 8 billion people in the world in 2008 when the aliens killed everyone. So that's 8 into 36. That's almost a quarter uh, of the world is basically modern people, but yet they've barely met any modern people. He kind of thinks of this of this story. We see more if almost a quarter of everybody is modern. Why haven't we seen more of these 2008 people? They should be all over. Where are these people? How come they talk and they say, well, have you met this? I haven't. How many modern people have you met? Oh, one or two, or should we should have been meeting more. Um, and they also go over the story of the symbols on the forehead that Kaz mentions. So I'm gonna I'm just summarize that real quick. I'm gonna let you go ahead with what you were talking about there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, absolutely. And there we go again. I don't think it would take me till 32 AR to notice, hey, how come there aren't more people from past 1983? And
Yeah,
percentages and ratios, that's another math thing. So here we go. We have to
yeah.
be forgiving about the math side of
We
things.
should
Like,
every 1 out of 4 people you meet should be almost 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 persons you meet should be from have been killed in 2008, right? Like that would make
right.
sense, right?
Percentages and ratios, there we go. We have to be forgiving of these characters for not being able to figure this out
Yeah,
way sooner than they have. But there we go again. It's a math issue, so we're not going to get into it. We'll be forgiving that these characters take till 32 AR to start noticing that no one's been alive since past 1983, even though there are some people claiming, and now the story has traveled throughout the world, that there are people from 2008 up to 2008. But in fact, later on, much later on, we find out in fact why this is, but they should
yeah,
have suspected it much earlier.
yeah.
Anyway, so
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 you were talking about frigates. He meets this guy, right?
right, they're in a peaceful area. They're around a campfire. They're telling stories, having a good time, and Bill O'Wayne recognizes Peter Frigate, and as they're reminiscing, they sit around talking, and again, they bring up the ceased resurrections because this is a different group, and so it's always one of the conversations. I know I keep bringing it up, but mortality is one of the topics. And when Bill and Pete are reminiscing about their escapades, uh, Burton notices that Bill sure seems to remember a lot more than Pete does. Pete does remember some stuff, but Bill seems to remember a lot more. And Bill's even confused as to why Pete didn't recognize him and why Pete doesn't remember so vividly some things that Bill does. And that raises Burton's suspicion. And that actually made me question, when I look at this whole thing, why did this is a side note that came up in my head. Why did, way back in book one, why would Frigate, well, we don't find out this stuff, but I'm asking you,
Mm-hmm.
I'll ask you for later. why would Frigate and Monad go after Spruce? We'll talk about that because I don't really, if they are who we figure out they are, why do they even go after Spruce in book one and get this whole, like, have this whole interrogation thing? That's something I'd like to discuss because that's not cleared up really. It doesn't make sense that, because suddenly, anyways, I'm jumping ahead here because I just wanted to bring that up to you so we discuss it.
Yeah.
Um, okay, sorry, I'm jumping pages here. Yes, Kaz is the one who brings it up. Even though Burton's suspecting things, Kaz is also now remembering stuff, and he remembers not remembering a big chunk of time. And
Right.
I can't remember what triggers Kaz to remember this. Oh yeah, it's because Burton told their whole story. That's why I brought this up. Burton tells their whole story to this campfire because there's a bunch of people there that aren't part of their crew, and they're
Right.
having a good time reminiscing. And they talk about Spruce, and that made me go, why the heck did Monat and Frigate chase that guy down in the first place? But that made Kaz think, hey, yeah, I remember not remembering huge chunks of time back then. And it gets into this whole thing that Kaz tells his concerns to Burton. Hey man, something's wrong. I don't remember big chunks of time from back then, and I generally have a very clear memory. What's going on? And Burton starts going, hey, I wonder if he was hypnotized. And Burton hypnotizes him, and that reveals all kinds of stuff. If you want to. Do you
Right.
want to take over and get into the hypnotist and what that revealed?
Yeah. I think it's interesting that Farmer, he uses hypnotism. It's like he must have believed in hypnotism and all that stuff. That's kind of an interesting conversation. But anyway, so yeah, just getting back to the story. So he hypnotizes Kaz and finds out that the whole thing with the symbols. Kaz, when he first met Burton, in a certain sunlight, he notices that people have these symbols on there. Everyone has these symbols on their forehead, and we assume it's some sort of a way of identifying people. But it's not numbers or anything. They're symbols. We don't know what they mean. But Kaz notices that certain people don't have any symbols on their head, and he
Like it happened in book one when we talked about
yes.
Spruce. Yes.
But Kaz couldn't speak English, and so he's trying to say hey, but no one speaks his language. So then but now he remembers that, and Burton hypnotizes him to find out what happened in this certain space of time. And during that time, he basically finds out that Monat and Frigate are together. They take Kaz into this into a hut, and they hypnotize him and basically get him to forget that he didn't see symbols on their foreheads, and to see symbols from now on, right?
Yes. Right. Right. And yeah, absolutely. And Burton actually had Kaz remember what those symbols look like and draw them for him. And it revealed that frigates, they almost looked like Roman numerals, and frigates and monads were almost identical, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all the other ones were random all over the place. An ampersand here and a squiggly line there, and just random gibberish. Meanwhile, frigates and monads were very basic and simple because they were pressed for time whenever
Yeah.
they hypnotized Kaz, and they only had time to give him some basic, quick. Here, you see this. Every time you see us, now you see this squiggly line on our heads. They hypnotized them that well that he always thought he saw that on them. And Burton saw that, wow, why are these two so similar and basic, and all these other ones are so random and complicated? And so obviously something's up with these two. They decided to confront.
Well, they get Bess first, right? Because she's also
Bess.
the same. She's the same,
Right.
type of human as Kaz. So they're gonna check with her too, confirm the story. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, you're right. And the three of them decide they're going to confront Peter and Monat, and and that's when they disappear. They disappear before they can confront them.
They go to confront them, and they're gone.
They're gone, and Burton reveals that Burton says a line that stuck with me where Monat is the most sensitive person he ever met. Monat can really tell things. So just like the Sufis can say, I bet you they're ethical agents and figure out some of the things on their own. Monat would be far superior to that. Like
Mm-hmm.
he's got next level stuff going on.
Yeah.
And stuff we can't comprehend, and so that's why they were gone before they could even be confronted. And it's fascinating. And
And this is the first time where we get the idea that, wait a second, the story about 2008 and what happened there is may not be true, and that Burton figures out that basically he's met very few people between 1983 and 2008, when he should have met a lot more, and perhaps
ridiculously a lot
there's
more.
there's
Yes.
something going on, and that maybe this whole story about 2008 and the aliens, destroying, satellite killing everybody, maybe that's wrong. Maybe the cutoff date is more like 1983 for people who have died, and there's nobody who's died after 1983 on the Riverworld, right?
It's the absolute yes. It's the first. Let's establish this. Let's definitely suspect. It's telling the reader, and it's really establishing. Yes, anyone past 1983, you got to suspect them now for sure.
Yeah, and
And he goes, okay, go ahead. Sorry.
no, I was going to say that basically now we know that um, with this information we know how the ethical agents were identifying each other, right? If your story says that you died after 1983, you're an agent. If before that, you're not. So that is the common thread that we basically can figure out. It's not stated as as such. I think it's stated in the next book that, like, exactly what I've said, but basically we can figure it out now.
If this
That's
world
the
was real, they realized that that wouldn't fly, and they'd be caught in 2 AR. You know what I mean? Not 32 AR.
yeah.
But in Farmer's World, that works, and that's fine. I'm good with that too. It's easier. Like it's a complicated book, so at least this makes it simplified in that capacity, at least.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say about Burton's suspicions? I think we.
No, that's perfect. And then he goes. This
Oh,
is one of the cool scene transition where he goes
well, hold on,
on to
hold
the
on.
dark. Oh, sorry. Go.
We're over an hour now, so I'm gonna cut this right now as part one.
Well, wait a
And
second. Let me finish this line. Then he
okay.
goes on to the dark tower,
Oh
and
yes, yes.
the scene shifts. So let's at least get that in.
No, for sure. Sorry, I thought you were gonna go on to the next part.
No
Um,
problem.
yeah. So I'm gonna cut it right now. That's the end of part one. We were just over an hour. We're gonna get to part two right away, and that'll be posted up. If you've done part one, that'll be part two will be posted up right away soon after. All right. Thanks, and we'll see you in part two.